I always to say that single piece flow is a way to like kind of produce a single unit start to finish. And the purpose of all this is that you create productivity in the shop floor, right? So you can have higher yield per labor input. So that's the problem to tackle. Every factory has it. And there's tools that you can use to kind of chart it out and then figure out where technology plugs in. And some of the stuff you guys are doing in FlowFuse, right? That could be a thing that assists the productivity gains.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Industrial Visionaries. Today I'm speaking to Aroon Sehgal. He is a Chief Information Officer at Videojet Technologies. Aroon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Tell me a bit, like, how did you get this nice of a job title?
Well, I've spent a better part of my career kind of straddling business and technology, and it's basically I've made a career out of it. I think there's a lot of value in sitting in the middle of where business intersects with technology and kind of merging the two disciplines. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and turns out I'm pretty good at it. So I'm at Videojet now.
And where did you start your journey?
Back in the day, I was at a little known company called NBC Universal, part of GE. I was part of the business unit in home entertainment, basically DVD movie business. But I transitioned to the technology organization in 2008 after a very large ERP migration, ERP implementation. We moved most of the film business on SAP. And then post-implementation, I helped stabilize the application and, kind of design the business processes that till date are kind of powering the company.
Okay, cool. And so ERP is generally seen as like the beginning of the digitalization movement. It was almost always the first digital asset in these OT companies.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit on like how the technology stack evolved from the ERP days and how IT and OT are now connected?
Yeah. So ERP is still a pretty important component on what companies do. I think it's safe to say pretty much every company that's manufacturing anything has some sort of an ERP system running, whether it's the latest or something outdated. But over time, there's been a need on the shop floor to have similar tools that the back office does, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had the evolution of MES systems that connect to your ERP systems. And I think we're now moving on to the next phase of that is how do we equip our workforce on the shop floor with the perfect data to make the right decision every single day, every single minute. And one way of doing that is to just equip them with the technology that they can craft themselves to solve the problems that they have day to day.
Can you dive a bit more into exactly the last part? Like, how do you give them the right technology, and do they bring the technology to you, or does the C-level exec make the decision on what technology is adopted?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think the phrase I use is you have to go local, like you have to go local or global local. So it's a little bit of a global view. Tools that can be scaled at enterprise, and we can have a team manage it centrally to drive for sure, come from the top down. But one key component of that is what we call at Videojet and any company that follows continuous improvement is to go to Gemba, to actually go see where the work's being done, to understand what the challenges are, and then suggest the solutions. So for me, that's a critical part of how we select. So I go and see the factory floor and what's happening day to day and where the pain points are and how we can solve them. But then we also empower the users that are on the shop floor to come up with their own ideas and give them autonomy to select tools that are probably specifically good for that one location or one operation, right? So it's not one size fits all. It's you have to find that right balance between what's localized and what should be scaled.
That's a great segue in one of the questions we face very often, actually. How do you make that decision? Like, when is something such a success locally that you want to pull it out just on the local area and deploy it to multiple sites? And how do you make that decision? And also vice versa, like when can a local facility just make the decision on their own and say like, nah, this is not for us?
Well, I think it's seated in value. So things that tend to make it to the enterprise level are higher in return. So you basically do your ROI calculation, ensure that if you have something that has a payback period of like 2 years at scale, you want to bring that to the core. But if it's solving something that's smaller in nature, like for example, right, you have in a shop floor, they might say, hey, I need capability to pick, pack, and ship certain components, certain finished goods, because I have two extra people, currently running shifts and doing that work, right? And there's some error in that. You could say, hey, you can deploy a local pick, pack, ship solution that will kind of automate that process, and you remove one headcount, right? So that's not going to change the world, but that one headcount or one resource reallocated is value gained by the company, right?
Yep.
But that might not apply to all sites. The way I think about it is like if I'm trying to solve inventory issues across multiple locations because I have excess inventory, right? And I deploy a solution that automates purchasing decisions in the factory, right? That is at enterprise scale because that's where you're trying to capture the value at that level.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And then, as a chief information officer, I reckon making data accessible throughout the organization is one of the top priorities. One of the challenges you might run into is that data becomes too widely available.
Yeah.
So how do you guard the security boundaries of the information and of the data while also allowing information to go where it needs to go?
It's a good question. I think we do in vendor selection. Whoever is coming in kind of sells a piece of software that will actually host our data in any shape or form, we spend a lot of time vetting them out before bring them in. So ensuring that the right cybersecurity guardrails are in place at the vendor level is important. And really internally, we have a zero trust architecture is what we try to follow. To basically put the right security protocols in place that ensure that our data is not being exfiltrated or used in ways we don't want them to be used. Having the discipline around data and having a data governance structure within the company also helps, right? So having a named individual that is responsible for the cleanliness and the security of the data, working with cybersecurity, and having these people explain to the organization how we should treat our data is also another way to safeguard it.
And on about the same topic, we see the architecture of the unified namespace pop up more and more, which is more like an architectural decision on how to distribute the data and removing the point-to-point connections that we've seen in manufacturing now towards the PubSub and broad distribution of this data. So even if you then apply like all the latest security frameworks, data might still end up in, for example, different sites, a different facility. Do you see any issue with that? And is that all okay? Or like, do you reckon there's some pushback on these architectures?
They could be, right? So, I mean, companies that have built through acquisition and have decentralized operations without a central OT, which is most industrials that are global in scale, kind of chart their own path locally in that sense, right? I can see some value in doing it in one single layer across the enterprise, right? But what needs to happen there is that it can't just be a technology project or an IT project, right? There should be a business benefit to the business that married with the technology itself can add value.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense. And then on to like applying technology. Can you share an example of how you've seen people rapidly prototype solutions and then how they do so without disrupting production environments?
Yeah, so the example I'll give you is we deployed an MES solution called Tulip, and it's a citizen development tool, right? The reason why the use cases that were coming through the organization were very unique in nature, and we couldn't find something that could apply to all of those use cases. So we gave the power to the users on the floor to design their own MES depending on where they are. And we provide them the right sandbox with live production data so they can tinker around with it. So there was, anytime you wanted to test something out or create an end on board or something, you would have live production data in your sandbox environment. and you'd have full privilege to go and play around. Once you know what you want to do, then there was a change control process to migrate into production, right? So I guess the way I'm saying that we don't like production environment changes in the live production environment. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. So you separate out your development from the live production environment, and then you promote the development to production at a set time.
Yep.
And who manages that process? Is that IT or is it OT? Is that a combination of two?
It's a combination of two, especially in the citizen development model. When changes ready to be migrated, obviously there's a change control board that's central to the operation. Then we for example, we pick one Wednesday out of the month, changes move into production, whether it be ERP, MES. It's a pretty careful process, a lot of detail around it, because it's also an audit risk, right? So you can't just move things into production without a paper trail. The auditors don't really like that.
And now I'm just curious, why Wednesday?
We had to pick a day. Wednesday happens to be the easiest day of shipping out of the week, right? So,
Okay.
so if you think about it, manufacturing companies, like typically Fridays you're always trying to find a hockey stick on fulfilling orders. So Wednesdays seem to be the most calm.
Okay, good to know. I'll keep that in mind. So now more and more people are building these applications with like a two-layer flow views and more citizen developers joining. How do you balance the speed, and how do you also ensure that the enterprise like still meets the auditability? Is that all hinging now on that's Wednesday?
Well, it depends again what you're trying to move, right? Things that are meaningful in nature, right, that could disrupt business, we try to do it in a controlled fashion. So there has to be a t-shirt sizing of what the change is. These rules are not obviously by any means that strict, but there's an art to it. And having my technology folks embedded in the shop floor and working with the OT folks is what that communication is what makes sure that we do the right things, right? You said something, we talked about Wednesday, right? Another reason why Wednesday is because, if something breaks, you have people available the next couple of days to fix it. So you're not doing it on the weekend. So it's closely coordinated. Then we also look at from a lens of, is it financially material is that process financially material to the business, right? And if it is, it's a little bit more controlled than usual.
So in the digital realm, like the digital only businesses, they generally shape their processes around revertibility. So if something is very easy to revert, then they move quickly. If it's hard to revert, then you move slowly. And in this case, the way you balance it is like materially different for the company. So if it's materially impacting, if it goes wrong, move slow. If it's materially inconsequential, move as fast as you can.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. You don't want to migrate something on the shop floor that takes production down or shipping down, and that's things to watch out for.
Fair enough. Okay, and so now low code is being deployed more and more often. We're still seeing IT and OT teams. I wonder if that gap is ever gonna be closed enough, and do you reckon it will be closed enough that, like, are these ever becoming like one team? Do you think?
In my view, it should become one team if you want to move at the speed of change, and that's the end goal for somebody like me. In fact, I recently shared my vision of where I want IT to play or technology to play a role. It should be where the business and technology lines are completely blurred, right? That's where technology needs to go. And it's definitely possible, right? You got to break down those silos in the organization and show value in doing it that way, and then turn the table. It's definitely a slow process in the organizations I've been in, but it's making its way. Maybe another 5 or 10 years, maybe AI can help us get there faster.
Who knows? We'll see. And so getting there faster, I reckon part of getting people to develop is just a hurdle. So they need to get over certain thresholds before they actually start to trust themselves and build. Would you say, well, like how do you manage them, and how do you train them to get developing as fast as possible?
I think one of the things we deal with is an aging workforce in our factory floors, right? And bringing new talent that has that capability from the get go has become a priority. So I guess there's two ways, right? Having a good performance objective process within the company and identifying the right talent to do the big things is an art inside companies that we need to get better at. So we invest a lot of time in identifying those individuals that have that capability and grow them. Right? We give them opportunity. Simultaneously, we also spend time figuring out who doesn't fit the future, right? And how do we manage those folks out of the organization or reassign them to something that's not strategic in nature? And then recruiting right out of college, that skill set and having presence on campuses is another way to bring talent in that'll get us there. So it's definitely a culture shift on how we staff our factories, and it's a challenge that I think most manufacturing companies are dealing with right now.
All right. And then for my closing question, if you look at other manufacturing leaders and they are looking to transform their operations to the extent where you are now, what would you say is the first and most impactful small iteration they can take?
It's going to start on the shop floor. I think the one area that definitely is of high interest to us, and even in my previous companies, it is around efficiency of shop floor labor and ensuring like that the right steps are being taken without waste to produce a unit, right? So I always to say that single piece flow is a way to like kind of produce a single unit start to finish. And the purpose of all this is that you create productivity in the shop floor, right? So you can have higher yield per labor input. So that's the problem to tackle. Every factory has it, and there's tools that you can use to kind of chart it out and then figure out where technology plugs in. And some of the stuff you guys are doing in FlowFuse, right? That could be a thing that assists the activity gains, right?
All right. Yeah, thanks for your insights today. That is sadly all we got time for this episode. Enjoyed your insight thoroughly, and want to thank you for sharing them with us.
Thanks, EJ. Nice talking to you.
Likewise.